Welcome everyone to this episode of your Freedom Hub's Cash Patient. I'm your host Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host Charles Froman. We are being hosted by the Freedom Hub, which is the disruptors intersection, and that's definitely what we're trying to accomplish. Our main thrust on this particular series is pertinent to healthcare, and there's some very obvious problems with it, and we're here to can't fix the system everyone's been trying for forever. The president even tried to repeal and replace, and that didn't pan out too well. So it just comes down to us to take back control of it. One of the key elements we're using is this award-winning app that we're affiliated with called Wow. You're going to want to come and find out more about it. We've got a special site set up, and it's really allows consumers to connect directly with doctors, get special pricing, pay cash, and helps the doctors get away from that third-party pay comic we just showed a minute ago. These are recorded, as I said. First off, here's that Wow landing page. These are recorded, and we're working off of our main corporate site, the mphwf.com, which is Marketplace for Health, Freedom, and Wealth. We did want to let you know that this is the place you're going to want to come after today and into the future, because when you come to the homepage and you hover, you'll see this information tab. And you may even just want to bookmark this tab, frankly. But what happens is it tells you a little bit about all these shows that we do. And here's the 2 for the day. Oh, I'm on the wrong tab. Sorry. I was wondering why is that not cooperating? Here on the left shows the 4 o'clock show we do, which is more about freedom issues in general. The one in the evenings, which is pertinent to health and cash patients. And then the one Thursday evenings, which is pertinent to your wealth. Very important. We also list all the future guests and then also the past guests. So here's where you would come to see these various video links. And these are all the different platforms that we're on. We add them as they become popular. Here's some examples. So here's just from the BitChute channel here. You'll see there's an awful lot of interesting things on here. Here you can see a little more of the breadth of it by seeing it up on the Brighteon site. They're all great, whether they're new or old. They're all going to be really important. So you'll certainly want to come check them all out. These are not the one and done situation. These conversations typically do need to continue forward. You want to continue to connect with some of these people, help on their issues, become participants with them. Each one will have their own site, and we keep adding them, expanding them as we go. Here's the links to the various videos for this person, a little description, their presentation. Maybe they might have their blog links, some issues that they're working for. And in fact, that's kind of the conclusion here, is this tab under the homepage where we're looking under freedom, fighting for freedom. Here you'll see this is the top half is all these most current issues that you need to take action on. And it's not like whether you should pick one or the other. You really need to act on all of them. And then here's a little litany of the various organizations that keeps expanding of those that are helping work for our freedom. And typically at the bottom of most of these pages, there's a great little collection of videos from a variety of resources. So on that particular note, let's dart into today. So here's where I'm going to let you go back to this page. You'll see the attributes of this. And Charles, if you'll do the honors.
Gladly, Jeff, and welcome, Siri Chand. Folks who are regulars know that Jeff and my health company was featured in Forbes for creating the cash patients that reformers know is needed. If you want to solve this cartel's problems, we have to upgrade patients into price-sensitive shoppers. And one of the nice benefits of price shopping to save money is quality. You learn other choices, you educate yourself. And Jeff and I both are very high on integrated and natural care as preventive and primary care. Certainly pharma and surgeons are critical, but if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't look at the nutrients, look at other traditions from around the world, you're shortchanging your health. You just can't do it. So the self-thinking patient is going to want to come every week to learn from our great leaders from across the country. Siri Chand is my favorite kind of doctor. She's an internist, so educated in allopathy, who wanted more. So she got educated in the more natural modalities, Ayurvedic to be specific. And she has taught in medical school. She's worked in clinics as a doctor. She really is driven to figure out how to educate the masses on, how she characterizes it. Let's examine your patterns. What are your habits, your patterns? What are, and therefore deduce from those your behaviors that we can change so you can avoid the doctor and cure up to, get this, 80% of chronic diseases. Let me repeat that, 80% of chronic diseases are reversible. So looking forward to tonight's, Jeff.
All right, very good. Let's shift gears here. I'm going to give her control of the screen, so if you will.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Excuse me. I'm delighted to be here among such a health literate group of people. It's so refreshing. I wanted to just highlight a couple of pieces about my unique. And one of the things that has become apparent to me, and I always like to tell people I'm a lot older than I look, for the record. I am close to 50. So I'm not new to the medical journey. And I started my process of assessing what I thought good medicine was in the 90s. And at that time, naturopathy was sort of just getting off the ground. The schools had been around for a bit. And I had the difficult process of deciding which route felt more aligned for me. Did I want to dig into allopathic medicine with all its science and evidence base, or go into naturopathy with an understanding that you could do more within that context, more freedom. You could utilize things, you could have a different point of view. Well, as you could tell, ultimately I decided to take that journey into allopathic medicine, in part because I'd had a very rigorous science background. I went to the Magnet School of Jefferson in Northern Virginia, and undergrad at UVA. All of that was very heavy emphasis in science. However, I did, starting in the 90s, basically have two educational pathways. So I went through all the traditional, I have a master's degree, all the traditional allopathic process, residency at Mayo Clinic in internal medicine, fellowships, you name it. I'm triple board certified, internal medicine, hospice medicine, and integrative medicine. And through the process of all of that, I began to sort of formulate a comprehensive picture for myself. Now, the continuity, the other concurrent journey, was in natural therapies. And through my investigations, I studied botanical medicine, essential oils, yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, traditional Chinese medicine. Ultimately, I came to an impasse where I wanted a system that could help me categorize everything I was learning into some sort of framework. And I realized I had really two basic options for whole body healing systems that were more readily available in the West. There are more, but in terms of what I had access to, one would have been traditional Chinese medicine, and the other was Ayurveda. And I had a natural magnetism to yoga and meditation. And so Ayurveda is sort of a sister science to that. It's even said to be the precursor to traditional Chinese medicine. And theoretically, although the dates cannot be fully verified, the Ayurvedic textbooks, which I always like to show people, is, oh goodness, here we go. So this is one portion of one of the main volumes in Ayurveda. So oftentimes people think, my goodness, what Ayurveda is turmeric milk or golden milk, or it's vata pitta kapha, these terms that are sort of loosely thrown around. But actually Ayurveda is a comprehensive, vast and deep sort of study of the human condition. And initially it was an oral tradition. It was passed up through seers and rishis, so enlightened beings, they say, people that had deep meditative practices, and some would even speculate who also used substances to expand their consciousness, though we don't have clear documentation on that. But over millennia, basically, they began to observe the human condition again and again and again, and certain patterns, if you will, began to emerge, certain trends began to emerge. And as they observed, they would take notes, they would pass it down through generations. And each generation that passed through these lineages, the information would become more refined. And eventually it was written down. Some speculate around 600 BCE was when the first main textbooks were written. So we have a long legacy. And I found myself in modern internal medicine feeling a little frustrated by this drug would be valid this week, and then 3 weeks later, 3 years later, some controversy would come in. And so I really began to sort of wonder, where are the true origins of disease and imbalance? And I have to say, I was sort of remarkably surprised by how simple some of the solutions are for reversing chronic disease. And I felt like, well, surely someone through the course of my career would be willing to let me pilot programs where this would be a focus. And I have to say, and I'm not bitter, but maybe I'm a little, if I'm honest, that really I got a lot of lip service along the way, but I never got any institutional basis to support the work I wanted to do, which ultimately was very disheartening because I had poured a lot of energy and, of course, invested in my medical school education. So in 2018, sort of in the face of pretty severe burnout, if you can imagine, trying to innovate, trying to create change inside the system, I said, you know what, I'm done. Policemen, first responders, military, they retire at 20 years. I put 20 years into that journey. And I'm sure that I ultimately helped people, but I never got to do medicine the way I really wanted to. A couple years prior to that, from 2011 to 2014, I actually took 3 years off my regular clinical practice to study Ayurveda with Dr. Vasant Lad, who I would say is my primary Ayurvedic teacher. And Dr. Lad has a wonderful movie. If you're interested in Ayurveda, there's a movie called The Doctor from India, I believe, and it's on Netflix and Amazon. So if you're interested in sort of his journey, I think you'd be quite intrigued by all that he went through to bring the knowledge from the West, from his hometown of Pune in India, all the way here to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he's had a small and steady institute and ostensibly is sort of the grandfather of teaching Ayurveda to the West. Largely before him, it was not available. So when he arrived in the mid-70s, maybe you could find Ayurvedic education through Maharishi and their program, or some of the smaller ashram yoga intentional communities. But really getting this sort of process of bringing Ayurveda to the West is in many ways largely credited to Dr. Ladd and his students who he inspired. So I always feel a deep sense of gratitude and just basically deep gratitude for the efforts, endeavors that he has taken to bring that knowledge, to translate some of these concepts in Ayurveda can seem antiquated or colloquial or not even relevant to us. But I do think there's some core ideas that we can kind of look at. So I'm going to just switch up my screen here for a second. And we're going to take a look at a slide deck, and let's get this. So I'm gonna see here. I believe you can, whoops, let's do this. I want to just share that actual. There we go. Okay, so play from current. Now this presentation, my husband, who's very fond of me, has said to me many times that I could do monologues for a very long time. And I really would rather prefer this have some room for question and answer, because I find that people are very curious about Ayurveda, and I'd like to figure out what your questions are and see if I can answer them. So I'm going to spend about the next 20 minutes, going to review some core principles and what I see is the marriage of Ayurveda to the modern time. And then we're going to have some again, we'll have some time to sort of interact. So I want to be sure that that's available to you. So let's go ahead and play from start. Okay, so let's take a look here. I always like to just offer a disclosure, and sometimes even when I'm talking about food as medicine, I ask people to tell me what they eat if they're talking to me about food. And so in some ways, disclosure should be more broad than just industry affiliations, because someone inherently, with the amount of data and information we have, it's helpful to know someone's point of view. And so any rate, I don't have any institutional affiliations at this point. So I wanted to start off with the way that Ayurvedic knowledge is passed on is through sutras. And these are based on that oral tradition. And they are a process through which it's written in Sanskrit. So you'll see this first line here is in Sanskrit. This is the transliteration. And then this is the English translation here at the bottom. But when I first read this very particular sutra, it was as though I had come home. It was as though something inside me woke up and said, this I have been believing my whole career, yet it was never integrated into my training, into the mindset of any practice that I was ever part of. We do health maintenance, but not in the way that this sutra is, meaning, do you get a mammogram? Do you get your flu shot? Do you get a colonoscopy? That's not what I'm talking about. Those, of course, have their own importance. But this sutra says the purpose of Ayurveda is to help the healthy person to protect and maintain his swasthya, which is his health, and to help a diseased person to become healthy and to stay healthy. Well, you can imagine this seems pretty ambitious from my standpoint, but as an allopathic doctor, but I really began to think, hey, I think there's really something to this. Helping the healthy person to protect and maintain his health or her health. Well, I had never heard, I'm an independent thinker. I'm a bit of a maverick along the way. I've rocked a few boats, as you might well imagine. However, really this concept of how do we protect, as though it was the most precious thing, someone's health, beyond just these basic things of screening for cancer, because many of these screenings are just early detection. They're not actually prevention. So where is it in my training? Where was it in our communities that actually offered any sort of foundation for maintaining and protecting the health of the healthy? So what I would say to that is that as time went on, I really began to appreciate more so. So I'm going to just offer a couple of things that are happening in the Western, and it sounds like everyone here is going to maybe be familiar with these, but in case someone is rewatching, I want to highlight some things that are Ayurvedic in nature, but might actually be things that you're familiar with or that are that we're hearing about. The first one are the blue zones. So Dan Buettner, he's the Blue Zones founder, discovered 5 places in the world, and he dubbed them the blue zones, where people live the longest and are the healthiest. This is Okinawa, Sardinia, Nicoya, Ikaria, and Loma Linda. Believe it or not, that's where a lot of the Seventh-day Adventists are, in Loma Linda. It's its own little sort of microclimate of wellness. And what's interesting to me about this is that you might recall, I mentioned I'm board certified in hospice and palliative medicine. So I spent a period of my career interacting with and touching base with people at the very late stages of disease and towards the end of their life. In these blue zones, people often live very healthy lives well into their 90s and over 100. And so they sort of started doing some data scrubbing, like what are the common denominators that have allowed these people to live so long? So these are the Power 9 from the blue zones. Move naturally, have a sense of purpose, downshift, 80% rule. I believe that is, we could argue around what that actually looks like, but that has to do with food. Plant-wise, wine at 5, so typically a half glass to a glass of wine per day. Right tribe, loved ones first, and a sense of belonging. So what's really fascinating about this to me is that when we do evidence-based scientific studies, we don't often look at this blue, literal, this chart, blue area, or even really this green area. When we look at nutritional data, when we look at mindfulness data, we don't really bring these other factors of about someone's life into the equation, which in part is what makes studying Ayurveda so difficult, is that it really is an N of one, meaning each person is uniquely looked at and uniquely studied. And I think artificial intelligence, and maybe someone in this group's a real whiz at this, I don't see myself being the person that transforms that research model, but I'm sure holding a lot of intention for that person or persons or groups or scientific community to really push that agenda along, where we move past the current research model to something much more sophisticated that incorporates mindset, social connectivity, trauma history. And as a small aside, we know that trauma is an independent risk factor. Severe childhood trauma, which is measured in the A scores, is an independent predictor of mortality above many other factors of lifestyle. So we don't include that in scientific studies. So I thought this was quite intriguing when I first learned about the blue zones. Well, enter maybe a couple years after that, I began to learn about this new field that's sort of, you could almost say, blowing up. And I will say this, I know a lot of physicians, and I know a lot of natural healers. And oftentimes these like oil and water, these two communities, there's not a lot of connectivity, there's a lot of miscommunication. But I will say this, there's approximately 60 to 70% burnout in primary care medicine right now. And the suicide rate for physicians is almost 2 times higher than the general population. And I think physicians themselves are getting to a certain place of not feeling good in the model too. And so we're seeing these direct primary care models. We're seeing people like me stepping out totally. But there has been this huge interest in lifestyle medicine. And there are 6 pillars in lifestyle medicine. And it's stress management, relationships, quality sleep, avoiding risky substances, plant-forward diet, and I may have not said this, but physical activity. And so I always like to show this slide because this is sort of what we used as our introduction to this talk. But this is so fascinating to me. 6 in 10 Americans have chronic disease. 38% will be diagnosed with cancer. Half of all Americans will have cardiovascular disease. 1 in 3 Americans have pre-diabetes. And, 90% don't know it. 34 million people live with type 2 diabetes. This one here is the staggering one to me. 72% of Americans are overweight or obese. And so we feel that from this, from the data that they have collected, the American Academy of Lifestyle Medicine, that poor diet, sedentary behavior, smoking are one of those, are the main inputs for how this happens. So they believe that you can restore health in 72% of people with chronic diseases related to lifestyle through the following 6 pillars: a whole food plant predominant diet, 150 minutes per week of moderate exercise, 8 hours of restful sleep per night, daily relaxation time to lower stress, not smoking, regular connection to positive people. Now, what's fascinating to me about this is that in some ways, I feel like Americans, we know this, yet we don't do it. Everybody's got their various reasons, but I think that's a worthy tangential conversation, because sometimes I think when I learn about some of the integrative protocols or functional medicine, which of course have their value and their place once you are sick, but sometimes it seems like to get healthy, it's really complicated, but actually it's not. And I would add that if we brought in some Ayurvedic principles into this 6 pillars, that a lot of people dealing with chronic health conditions could significantly dial back the issues they're having. And this is the basis of Dean Ornish's program that he has found as a Medicare as a pay. So basically you can enroll in, I think it's either an 8 or 12-week program that's all about restoring health to people who've had a significant cardiovascular event. So if you haven't had that cardiovascular event, it's not an option for you. However, it's pretty powerful to think about all these options that arise. So that having been said, there's a very interesting interview where Dean Ornish credits, so Dean Ornish is sort of, you could say, the grandfather of modern lifestyle medicine. His programs are the basis through which many of the claims such as this infographic are demonstrating, among other scientifically based research from various sort of thought leaders in the field. However, my point here is that he, in his newest book, Dr. Ornish details experience he had while in medical school, that he became significantly depressed, almost suicidal, if not suicidal. And he arrived home from medical school, I believe it was either medical school or residency. He arrived home, and lo and behold, in the living room, his sister had invited an Indian teacher, a Swami, by the name of Swami Satchidananda. And the Swami said, why so, aptly said, why so glum, chum? He had a pretty good sense of humor, and proceeded to teach him the foundations of yogic living, which include now these pillars of vegetarian diet, movement, stress reduction, etc. And so interestingly enough, Dean does credit Swami Satchidananda with all the origins of his modern program that is the basis for lifestyle medicine. So I always think that he did a small disservice by not being more vocal about the origins. However, he claims in the 70s, no one would have listened to him if he had talked about things as abstract as the things that the Swami had been teaching him. So I don't know about everybody in this group, but I would love to see him be more forthright about that so that Ayurveda and the principles contained in Ayurveda could reach a more national sort of educational place. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share with you what's called Shushrut's definition of health. And I am going to attempt to read the Sanskrit. Granted, I studied for a couple years, but it always, it's a little bit of a tongue twister for me. So this is Shushrut's definition, and Shushrut is one of the primary philosophers and textbook writers. So he says, Samadosha, Samagnischa, Samadatu, Malakriya, Prasanat Mendriya Mana, Swasta Itya Abhidyate. Now, what this means, and again, I just taught an Ayurvedic course to physicians, and we actually took 12 weeks to take apart this concept. But basically, according to Shushrut, a person who is in a state of equilibrium with their internal and external forces, their doshas, their agni, their digestive quality, their dhatus, which are their tissue system, the malakriya, which are the excretions, sweat, urine, and feces, and whose soul, senses, and mind are all happy, the person for whom health emerges naturally. And by this, he means by doing these things, by minding our senses, by monitoring our mind, by cultivating a relationship with our divine nature, whatever spiritual tradition you're part of, by monitoring the functional qualities of the various tissue systems, looking at our digestive tract, that health is guaranteed, so to speak. So these are sort of very ancient, thousands of years old wisdom for us. So how can we unpack that a little bit in 10 or 15 more minutes? Well, I do want to say that I believe what it boils down to is that our health destiny is malleable. The modern paradigm giving us this array of genes and how the genes are utilized is what's the more fascinating question. So really epigenetics. And in the ancient models, we began to understand that health was this integration of many elements, and balance is a daily journey. So, for example, for me today, for those of you that might like to know, I had a fascinating day. My power went out in my car, my AC stopped working, my fridge started kicking in, and it was sort of like one of those, my gosh, what is what is in the electric system here in the house? But as the day went on, I just sort of had more of an appreciation for that. Um, I really wanted to um, offer myself some kindness, because really, when we try to push through and life is in chaos around us, so a lot of us are going through a lot with COVID and the health implications, the financial implications, the lack of social sharing, the uncertainty within it, of course, the upcoming election. No matter where you sit in the political spectrum, this is an inherently stressful time. And these qualities of stress are things that we actually have to look at every day. I used to love the idea that, well, if I just did X, I could bank it and then I wouldn't have to worry about it. But it just doesn't work that way. All the data from mindfulness and meditation, which now is becoming considerable as positive impact for health, is showing us that it does need to be a daily practice. And so I wanted to point out that in Ayurveda, there's a concept called the Dinacharya, which is your self-care daily routine. And, I really think, again, value-based healthcare may ultimately be one of the best things that we could see, where goals of care are towards paying providers based on the quality rather than billing for diagnosis codes, which was so frustrating for me, because no one would ever pay me, so to speak, as a provider to provide value to a patient in terms of prevention, which is why no one ever really wanted to pilot those programs with me. Now, in the single payer system, and I know this is a complicated equation, or this system that Charles is developing, where you are, as a consumer, are seeking out the best resources to support your health, knowing you have to advocate. One way or the other, the individual needs to understand that the current system as it exists has no vested interest in your health being cultivated in a relationship with your provider. Now, doctors who've stepped out of the model entirely have now the freedom to offer that, and they do longer visits, and it can get quite expensive. But I personally feel that there's value in having 60 to 90 minutes where your entire health history is reviewed. So again, this crossroads of integrating Ayurveda with lifestyle medicine, I believe, occurs at the epigenetic level. And I think it was funny, someone had mentioned epigenetics right before we got on, but I think epigenetics is really absolutely fascinating. If we think about it, at least this is my understanding, and I do have a little bit of science background, but haven't done the deep dives on epigenetics. But we're thinking about the genes as sort of the hardware, and we want to extract information from this hardware. And the epigenetics are the study of the qualities that turn genes on and off. And there's several mechanisms through which that happens. If you're a scientist at heart, these are the three main methods: DNA methylation, histone modification, and microRNA alterations. And these are how intergenerational codes are given, I believe. So, for example, we know that trauma can be intergenerational, which is absolutely fascinating if you look at implicit bias towards trauma or underprivileged people in healthcare. There's really no mindset, there's no insight coming through about that. So this, again, this is just, I don't want to do too deep of a dive into the epigenetics, but Dr. Ladd, who I just adore, he always used to say, what are the pathways to inner healing? They may be through our five senses. It could be through specific marma points, which are considered to be sort of energy centers that are on the surface of the body that interact with the internal processes that are outlined in Ayurveda, the food we eat, the exercise, the sleep, exactly, all these different elements. And I always like to point out the agouti mice. In case you're not familiar, they're named for the agouti gene, which the mice are large, fat, and yellow, prone to cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. And Jerdal and Waterland were curious, what if we fed them differently in terms of the moms? So the mouse on the left, the mom had a normal diet, and the mouse on the right, the mom was supplemented with choline, folic acid, betaine, and B12. And with changes in the diet, scientists silenced the agouti gene. So this was really the beginning of understanding that diet actually had these profound impacts on the body and how genes are utilized. So I think as we're moving forward, and again, this is Randy Jerdal's quote, it was a little eerie and scary to see how something as subtle as a nutritional change in the pregnant mother rat could have such a dramatic impact on the gene expression. So the point I'm making here is that, for example, folic acid is in leafy greens. And in Ayurveda, leafy greens carry the bitter taste, which is known to reduce ama, or inflammation. So here we start to see the bridges of how these systems could partner with modern science. But again, abstract, and of course, very limited amount of research is going on in this direction. And of course, there are some other generational studies that were looking at famine. And, if a previous generation had had famine, the next generations lived longer. When there's bountiful food, people were happy, but next generations die earlier. So again, we always say you are what you eat, but what about you are what your grandparents ate? Again, this would all be outlined and understood in Ayurveda. And of course, I have always loved this concept of 7 generations. And this, even in the Bible, it's included, these concepts of how things are generationally communicated. So if we want to think about shifting the balance, we have to appreciate the cumulative beneficial effect of introducing lifestyle changes. And then these daily choices have an impact on multiple processes in the body that influence longevity. There's 4 major theories of aging: the free radical theory, the immunologic theory, inflammation theory, mitochondrial theory. And functional medicine, modern science, is really digging into what exactly aging is, looking at telomeres, which shorten with each cell division. And short telomeres have been associated with a range of age-related diseases. So again, I think Ayurvedic recommendations help with these telomerase regulations. So we know that lifestyle choices can impact telomerase action, epigenetic regulators. And in this particular study, it looked at the loss of histone methyltransferases and DNA methyltransferase correlating with the loss of telomere length control. And so we know things here are so interrelated. And one of the difficulties that I found was that, and this is a slide from a study from 2014, Kanherkar, looking at all the different things that have, this was sort of like an analysis, looking at all these different elements that had epigenetic modulation. And though I don't have quite the time to go into it, seasonal correlations is called Rutacharya in Ayurveda: disease exposure, toxic exposure, financial, exercise, microbiome, therapeutic drugs, social, psychological, diet. All these things are having small and steady impact to the individual, and they're all very beautifully outlined in Ayurveda. So this is sort of the lifestyle foundations, if you will, that are found in Ayurveda. And again, these would be Sanskrit terms, but basically one of the primary ones I wanted to just point out is that there's a concept called the Dinacharya Adhyaya. And so the Dinacharya is really your self-care, how you double down on your self-care. And I think in this current time that we're in, with all the various risks and potential impacts to our steady state, to our own balance, being almost militant or aggressive. I hate to almost use those words, but to really become very clear in ourselves about what maintains and supports our health. And so developing this dinacharya is paying attention or tuning your lifestyle to an individual's current states and needs, and in such a way that health and vitality are promoted. So I usually recommend at this stage, if you're very interested in Ayurveda, that you seek out someone who's been trained and who can provide you that very individualized framework. Many times, if you have, just for those of you that have a sort of more in-depth understanding or have been introduced to it, there are body types that are based on trends. And I don't think those should limit us, to be perfectly honest with you. This is just a little review. You could go back and pause the video and take a look at these. I'm not going to read them for you. But again, this is the outline of the dinacharya. And I just wanted to come here, just one kind of thing here. So in terms of developing your own dinacharya, I believe that, these 8 areas, again, somewhat outlined in those lifestyle pillars. I developed this a good deal before I had seen that. But this concept of exercise, mindfulness, I believe is pranayama yoga, but really it's this mindful movement of the body, restorative sleep, time in nature, which is not elucidated in their guidelines, nutrition, a plant-forward diet, self-care. And this is very complex. And this, again, includes that dinacharya, but also includes removing the things that are not beneficial to our health, such as chemicals, pesticides, endocrine modulators, all the things that might be impacting our homeostasis. And as we saw in the blue zones, as we saw in the slide on lifestyle medicine, that a sense of connection, a sense of purpose, and being part of community is actually an essential part in maintaining our health. And the experience of loneliness, which many people in the elderly community experience through various reasons, has been demonstrated to be an independent risk factor for morbidity and mortality. So this is a pretty profound notion that, of course, is never taught in medical school. It's never taught to doctors, that community, sense of connection, and sense of purpose may be as essential as the food you eat in terms of how your body handles stress and how we interpret stress in those epigenetic patterns that are either pro-vitality or pro-imbalance, and then ultimately disease. In Ayurveda, there are 6 stages of disease. The first 3 things we largely say in the West are somatization, weird random things that have no correlation to an outcome. Stage 4 disease in Ayurveda is when we might think someone's sort of serious about what's happening from the allopathic standpoint, but we can't find anything. And 5 and 6 are what we're treating in Western medicine and allopathic medicine. So here we have these 4 stages, 4 levels of opportunity to just nearly reverse disease before it's more entrenched in the body. So I'm obviously arguing, if you will, I'm not arguing, but I'm positing that the prevention piece is largely being overlooked in primary care to the extent of the value of these lifestyle measures. So I'm going to finish up on that note and open this up for discussion, and hopefully you have found this informative. Again, in the nature of time, there's so much I could say, so much I could offer to you about Ayurveda, but I think there's definitely a lot to discover still in terms of how Ayurveda is going to inform current research models, how Ayurveda can directly impact each individual for their health. So all of these things sort of have a lot of discovery left to happen.
Sounds like
So
we're just at the Siri, it sounds like we're just at the beginning. Especially when you showed those 2 books and said this is just a part of it, and we've only talked for 45 minutes here. So yeah, I think we've got a few things to go. We're going to definitely take some questions here. Some hands are popping up. I got a couple things for you before I open it up for everybody else. You know, the goal, because I'm a victim of reality too. And, you know, growing up, you ate what your folks fed you and all the rest of the stuff. So until you got acclimated to eating like you're describing from when you were a kid, which then it's all second. I mean, you see people from the South that come to the North, they're eating like pig's feet and you're like, you're kidding. But to them, it's like, this is awesome because they've been eating it since
Right.
they were kids. So for people today to shift over is difficult. And just also, like you said, there's no money in curing anybody. There's only money in treating them indefinitely and selling them meds and tests and whatever. So our whole initiative is completely a mess in that regard. And then the other thing is how do you deal with technology? Because just to give you a question here to answer before we go to everybody else, you know, driving in my car with my wife and the kids, and we're out in the country, and we're looking at the scenery, and we're pretty superficially in nature, as you described it, by just driving in our car. Yet we look around, and the kids are in the back seat looking down in their lap, playing on their telephones. So how do you also not only overcome diet, but how do you overcome technology to draw people into what you're talking about here?
Well, so I was a athlete for many years, and it's kind of like, some things you can't defeat. Technology is completely here to stay. So I could give you sort of a trivial answer and say, well, don't allow them to have screen time. But I think we have to get more creative than that. And for example, one of the things that I think is that technology may have the ability to inspire meditation or heart rate variability. So I've been enjoying some of the AI or some of the game development that actually looks at helping kids to learn how to meditate, learn biofeedback, and learn about heart rate variability. So it's kind of like, if you can't beat them, join them. And so that would be number one, is, really try to bring in things that are nurturing or supporting other concepts, because I actually just don't think at the way we are in today's world, of course you can have stronger banks to the river and say, when we're in nature, screens are in the car, and kids, they can almost hardly not handle it I don't have myself kids. So there's that. The second thing, which is extremely important to me, is in Ayurveda, we talk about sensory input. So prana, which is this sort of external world. And the eyes are interpreting information, they're pulling in light. And the exposure to blue light has a very direct impact to circadian cycle, to the pineal gland, likely to meditation. So I'm a pretty firm believer in short screen breaks. So every 20 minutes, look for 20 seconds, 20 feet beyond your screen. So that gives the eyes themselves a rest. And in the evenings, if it's feasible, make sure the app is in the evening settings, which is more of an amber tone, or wear blue light blocking glasses, which are amber in color. So, sometimes we have to just work with what's existing. And those would be some suggestions to kind of do that. And everybody's going to have to navigate it their own way. I actually think technology is going to increasingly be a factor in health. It's a little early to find any data on it. But when I was in medical school, so this would be 2002 to 2005, we only had the Palm Pilot. We didn't have iPhones and all of this ways of collecting data. And I remember when I finished was when the first iPhone came out. So we're not actually talking about very long, less than 20 years, but the impact has been monumental. So maybe we need a little more discipline. Maybe we need to have a real sense of the potential danger, which of course it's not as prominent now in discussions because very difficult to differentiate the actual impact in the setting of so many other things. It was a great point though.
No, and that's a good response. And I'm glad you said, let's steer into the issue rather than say, well, just put the phone away. That's not realistic. So
It's not.
you might as well say,
I don't
how do
think
we,
realistic.
No, so how do you absorb it? But I like that idea of look 20 minutes and then 20 seconds looking away. That's a very good advice. And there is a software, I'll bring the thing up when we kick back, called Flux, Flux, that you can download, and that definitely shifts the light from your computer or your phone to the most appropriate color at the time. So that was great. Appreciate that. Was an excellent answer. Charles, I see your hand is up.
Thanks, Jeff, and fantastic presentation, Siri Chand. That was a shocking revelation where you say our behaviors can impact not just our progeny, but our descendants, and what our grandpa ate affects us. That's wow. We have such a responsibility to our kids and grandkids. Wow. Also, that loneliness factor you mentioned and its impact on morbidity and death, it reminds me of a protest some nursing home residents made about a few weeks ago against being locked down and quarantined when they were protesting from the streets in the wheelchairs going, let me take the risk. I'm dying of loneliness here. I think that's a tragic dynamic of the last 6 months. My question, though, is twofold. How can folks find Ayurvedic care if they want to test it out, number one? And number two, what kind of daily practice do you do? Because as a fellow yogi, I've found from experience that point you made that you have to do this every day is true. There's no shortcut. There's no banking, a 5-mile run. If you don't do yoga, I'm a mess. So those two questions.
Okay, so big differ here. The first one again, sorry.
How do we find Ayurveda if you want to check it out, and then daily practice?
Daily practice. I got on a bit of a mental tangent about how much of my practice I'm going to actually share. So the first one is, how do you find an Ayurvedic practitioner? So what I would argue, what I would say here is that you want to find someone who's done a little bit of a deep dive. And so it's not a regulated profession at this point in time. And though I see the value in not being regulated, I also see the challenge in terms of assessing who then could be qualified to offer you support and care with something as precious as your health. And I always recommend people can go to NAMA, N-A-M-A, and I believe it's .org. The website. So, and I can double check that before we hop off the call. But the NAMA has a practitioner database. And I think that's an important quality to sort of have as a resource. But always do a gut check. Sometimes people have done modest Ayurvedic study and are still on that list. And so if you land with someone, it can be a little difficult if you don't feel you trust them or you're not convinced they're fully knowledgeable in either Western or Ayurvedic terminology. And I like to joke I'm a little bit of a unicorn. I know of no other physicians in the West who've done as much study in Ayurveda as I have. There are certainly physicians in India who have done dual degrees, but in terms of the integrative medicine community, I'm not aware of anyone who has quite my knowledge base. And so I'm working on training physicians and getting physicians to a place where they have more ability to experience Ayurveda. That having been said, there are some wonderful Ayurvedic practitioners who don't have the allopathic paradigm already imprinted in their system. And if you're primarily looking for support from the tridoshic theory, using lifestyle measures, meaning more as prevention, and a lifestyle practitioner would be fantastic. There are probably 10 to 12 sort of relatively well-known India trained, they're called Vaidyas, meaning they've gone through the full Ayurvedic medical practice training education in India, who practice in the US under various other types of licenses, acupuncturist, naturopath. And you can certainly reach out to me directly if you wanted to know that list. I could, it's a little work to name them all here in this setting. My own personal practice varies. And again, this is a typical Ayurvedic answer. So when it's in the heat of summer, my particular body type, which is predominantly Pitta, I struggle quite a bit with the heat. It gives me migraines. It makes me extremely irritable. I get rashes. I get dysregulation of my nervous system from the heat. And so depending on where I'm living and what time of year really dials in how programmed my daily routine is. So it can include cold showers. It can include meditation, mindfulness, movement. For me, a big part of moving through all the burnout was creativity. And so I've been doing more with food directly. I decided that I would get as simple as possible. And even some of my conversations with the Vaidyas have really demonstrated for me that by building digestive capacity with simple meals, digestive teas. And so I've been, really diving into this sort of much more creative, artistic side of my life. And so that's actually been very nourishing. And in doing so, I've made time to connect with people. So again, we're looking at all these different facets that were never available when I was working 12 hours a day and charting 2 hours at night. I mean, there's a considerable financial disparity in terms of what I'm doing now, but I just realized it was worth it. And sometimes we have to leave those golden handcuffs to the chair, as I like to say. This is the elephant in the room, is that, physicians make a very decent salary and above average what most people are able to earn. And this makes it very difficult to leave or shift because of the sense of inherent risk. But for me, these pieces of my journey. So I would say, though it's an amalgam, my daily practice is sort of incorporates all these different things. And sometimes, for sure, cold showers. Definitely had a cold shower today because the AC wasn't working and I got really overheated. And so long answer to your question, Charles. So
That's great. Thank you, Jeff.
yeah.
Yeah, that was a great response. I love that long-winded description about income differences, which is a nice way of saying you have a very accommodating spouse.
Yeah.
And I see you got your hand up. Are you there? You have to unmute yourself.
Hey, this is Hina Bhatt. Thank you so much, Siri Chand, for this amazing presentation. I myself am an Ayurvedic doctor from India, practicing here in US. And everything that you presented today was exactly the way I always thought of before starting the practice here. My only question for you is, what is your vision for an integrated system of medicine in United States when you're thinking of Ayurvedic and conventional medicine?
Wow. Well, first, let me point out that if I've said your name correctly, Hina Bhatt would be a resource. Yeah, so she would be a great resource for anyone on this call. So what a serendipitous question. And here we have, this is how life works sometimes. So I would encourage you, again, Ayurveda is also about regional, being close, being sustainable. So if you can find someone who's in your region, who's close to you, this is the best, honestly. So please learn more about her and her practice. So what a beautiful question. And I have thought about it at length, to be honest. In fact, when I first started my medical journey, I was already studying Ayurveda. I was already learning about it. So now that's almost 25 years ago. And I held on to a vision of what I thought would be the ideal practice model. And boy, that vision beat me up. It really took the juice out of my marrow, so to speak, because I never found the ways to bring it to pass. But here's kind of what I envision, is that children are taught at a young age their body type, and what takes them out of balance. So starting at a young age, you're given a radically different lens using these principles of lifestyle and then the finesse and the refinement that's in Ayurveda to understand how to manage your particular constitution. Then let's say that basically works. As they get older, then you would have a health model that's group visit based in the earlier portions of the 20s, where you would have the ability to manage your stress, connect with others, learn how to cook. You know, every household's different. You would learn about exercise principles, good for your constitution. And so your primary care would actually be group visit oriented and prevention focused. And so this group visit model, so really there'd be this whole arm of healthcare oriented towards giving people this mindset of I have way more autonomy, way more control over my health than what we're currently teaching kids. Right now in young adults, they believe that they go see the doctor once there's a symptom. The whole notion of prevention has completely escaped this current generation. And that may be due to multiple factors. And then when you reach a stage where you have, for whatever the reason, developed an imbalance, let's say you're stage 4, 5, 6 in the Ayurvedic model, then you have a dedicated team. And the first things you do are doubling down on these lifestyle procedures using botanicals, mindfulness, stress reduction, cryotherapy, energy medicine, acupuncture, trauma therapy. You know, you dial in these things that can really help reverse disease. You give that a trial for a period of time. Now, cancer would be a completely different conversation, or severe acute diseases. If those measures don't work, then you transition to pharmaceutical or surgical intervention as a really a last tier on that health trajectory. I personally do not envision anything like this happening in my lifetime, but that is the vision that I've had probably since I started. And it's made me a little bit unbalanced mentally because it just seems so logical, but so unfeasible. So I don't dream as much about it anymore, to be perfectly honest, because I really just reached the end of the line in terms of holding a space of awareness for that. When time after time after time, I would say, I'd like to do this. I'd like to try this. I'd like to implement this. And people would say in the admin side, yes, it sounds good. Go for it. And then when the rubber hits the road, there's no billing, there's no coding. Okay, then all the support, institutional support fizzles out. And really it's because my employer benefits when I bill for diagnosis codes. So who ultimately has the patient at interest at heart? Not my employer. They're sort of indifferent to it. And so this was really, I think the VA has a really great model. And Tracy Gaudeau managed to get a massive grant to start integrative medicine at the VA, which I think has been fantastic because they're doing mindfulness, acupuncture, chiropractic, coaching, group interventions, and it's a single payer system. So the VA actually had reached a place where they were like, wow, these wounded warriors are coming back. They need support, they need healing. And what we're doing isn't effective. I don't know how that happened, but to me, it's like probably one of the most innovative models after the debacle of the VA for many, many decades. So I hope that answers your question. And I hope I don't appear too pessimistic, but
no, that was good. You're running long. I'm jumping in here real quick because we're fast running out of time. So unfortunately, we got other questions. We got to squeeze in one last one. But you know, in terms of that VA, you know, it's kind of like once you hit the wall, sometimes you need to do the right thing. And that's pretty exciting where things are go. But what you were emphasizing, just what Charles and I were mentioning earlier, it's going to boil down to you and me taking control. See, everybody keeps looking to some outside party, the government, some other third way. It never works. And I always tell everybody too, that third way, they want to get paid. How's that going to make it better or cheaper when there's a new person in the equation that wants to get paid? Can't. I got to be with you directly. Then we're golden. Because sure, I'm going to let you be the last question.
So I've been into Ayurveda for a long time. and I have a copy of Home Remedies by Dr. Lord. Um, and one of the things that baffles me is the inconsistency in the effect that these treatments have, and then you are left in the dark to figure out what next. I mean, you give the example of blue light, and you can change the light, or you can rest in between. But the thing that worked the best for me lately is this new supplement that has come into the market. That's been effective from almost get go. I don't know how long it'll last. Similarly, gut. For a while, I'm cougher, so giving up dairy was helpful, and then it was not. So then protein-based diet, that worked for a while. So it's kind of confusing, what is going to work for how long, and maybe there are other factors involved too. Um, how does an ordinary person get to know all this?
I so appreciate that question, and this is why I love doing group visits and sort of working with people through longitudinal educational process, because there is a reason why things have that variability. Typically, it's due to Agni, which is, I'm not speaking to you specifically, but typically the variability comes from seasonal changes that are impacting the digestive quality. And so the average person does have a harder time in terms of sorting that out. However, if you can take a short-term course, and I don't know specifically how much mentoring or how much support you've had along the way, it can be so valuable to take a 8 to 12 week or half semester course where you really get introduced to the principles in more depth. And then you begin to understand what are the factors that are driving this variability. So I really appreciate that. And I do hear that frequently, like, I work here, but doesn't work here. That's a common concern. So I do appreciate that.
Very good. Very good. All right. Well, unfortunately, we've run a long time. As you commented about that light thing, just to show everybody, this was one particular software program that's available for a computer and your device, your phone and so on, to help you out in that regard. You'll want to definitely come back and check on these links at the bottom here to be able to see these recordings completed into the future. They will be up over the weekend. So Siri, I want to thank you very much for being here today.
Yes, it's been a delight, and I appreciate everyone's attention. And this group, I love meeting people that are thinking outside the box and problem solving and taking that autonomy back for their own lives, for their own health. So I applaud all of you, and I'm grateful to know you all exist and are doing the good work.